A pleasant good day to all of our viewers. Welcome again to Marriage Encounter. Delighted to be with you as always. We trust that you are doing well. For those of you who are married, we trust that your marriage is going well. If it is not, you have tuned in to the right place because we are talking about conflict resolution. We're talking about things you can do, very useful information to help to put your relationship where it ought to be. With me today is Pastor Staton Adams. Pastor Adams, good day and welcome.
Good day, Dr. Greene, and good day to our listeners, viewers. Welcome again to another installment of the Marriage Encounter, where we share valuable tips, information for your improvement of your relationship, your marriage, your family. And this is what everybody would desire.
That's right. We want to invite our viewers, if you're able to, and those listening via Second Advent Radio, we want to invite you at this time to bow with us as we have a word of prayer. Eternal Father and our God, please be with us as we go into today's broadcast. We thank you for the opportunity to share with our friends in Radio Lands and for those who are listening on our various social media platforms. We ask for your wisdom and your guidance. In Jesus' name, amen. When we left off last week, Pastor Adams, you indicated that you were making a point about respect, right? And how important, because the last thing we mentioned last week was that in terms of having an acknowledgement of the fact that, hey, I may not have been going about this the right way. One of the things we ought to be able to do and to practice is to allow our spouses to say no. And you were speaking to the issue of respect. I don't know if you want to just pick it up from there.
Yes, and I was making the point in terms of respect because you are in a loving relationship with someone. At least we assume that's what it is, and we hope that's what it is, because the reason for marriage is love. And if there is love, then there is we are able to communicate. We are able to approach our conflict resolution as equals, issues as equals, that I have an opinion, you have an opinion. And then while we are trashing that through, I was making the point that respect plays a very important role. And because sometimes in that process, someone will have to say no, as the case may be. And I was referring to how grave the situation might be, what it is that is at stake, that may cause a spouse not to agree or to say no or yes, as the case may be, and that the other person should respect, and that's the freedom, that's the boundary loving spouse will give to the other person. And we are talking to the issue where how the person who does not love boundaries must grow and improve and see these issues as we're discussing them, right? So yes, respect is such a crucial matter there. I may not agree, but I respect your position, I respect your decision, I respect your point of view on whatever it is.
And I mean, and that's so very important, you know. But I hear somebody saying, well, pastors, so if my spouse doesn't agree with me, who makes the final decision? Now, that's an interesting question, right? Who makes the final decision? Because would you like somebody to make a decision? I mean, the two of you, you want to go to the beach. Your spouse wants to, let's say, go to the mall. Right, I'm going to do something that say you're on vacation, you want to go to the beach and relax, and your spouse wants to go to the mall or somewhere else, which means that you do not agree together, and you're asking who makes the final decision. Would you want to impose your will on somebody all the time? Do we always have to make a decision? You know, these are questions I'm deliberately asking for you to think about it. There are times when it's okay to agree that, you know, we can't come to a consensus right now. Let's just put that on the shelf and come back to it a little later. Maybe when we sleep and wake up, we will have a different opinion. Maybe we can discuss further and we will make a decision. Okay, I come with you today, you come with me tomorrow, or something to that effect. But it is dangerous to think that there always has to be a decision right now, and it has to be made by somebody if you can't come to a conclusion. Otherwise,
Yes.
again, you're taking away the
Yeah.
individual
Yeah,
from your
yeah,
spouse.
yeah, and because we say marriage also is a give and take. Who cares whether you go to the mall or whether you go to the beach? This time we go to the mall, the next time we go to the beach. So it's a give and take, and that's how it is. We don't have to make those things become so adversarial that we have a fight over those little small issues. Like I said in our last broadcast, depending on what the issue is, what gravity of the issue, we have to consider all of those things. And so therefore, we have to be careful. We have to think through some things carefully. But like some simple things as to whether you go to the mall or whether you go to the beach, I mean, those things are just, those are things that we can give and take with,
Most certainly. Yeah.
Yes.
And this is the discipline that I think some people need to go towards. You will not die. I'm going to say this slowly. You will not die if you don't get your way.
Right.
I mean, don't be a spoiled child. You sometimes you see these children in the supermarkets, they want to get the candy from the shelf and the parents say no and they begin to throw tantrums. You don't want to do that. We're talking about adults here. Marriage is for adults. And there are times when you are going to have situations where you don't see eye to eye. There are times when you're going to have one opinion and your spouse will have a different opinion. And wisdom says, one, we mentioned already last week, you don't react. You allow your spouse to say no. And if if you come up with this, what you consider to be fantastic idea, this amazing idea, hey, this is what I really want to do it. And when you take it to your spouse, you says, you're crazy. Your spouse says, are you crazy? You're mad? No, no way. Well, I mean, you may be deflated, but you're not dead, And as you said last week, and I wanted to strengthen that point, and I didn't get the opportunity because we didn't have time. But as you said last week, Pastor, sometimes it will turn out, history will reveal that your spouse saying no was a blessed thing.
Yes.
And when that does happen, you should have the maturity, or should I say the humility enough to go and say, sweetheart, thanks for saying no, because if we had done so what would have happened?
Yeah, and that is so crucial, right? We should have that kind of humility, and that is so crucial. Humility, admitting that, okay, I was trying to control you in this particular situation, but after all, it turned out a blessing that you eventually said no, and that was the right call to say no. But a lot of time we said, remember I said humility is such a difficult thing for us. I don't know. It is because, is it a character defect? Is it a cultural construct where people are so proud and arrogant? And that seems to be the norm, so that we find it difficult to humble ourselves. It is just humility is a virtue. Humility is a virtue. It is not a weakness. In fact, humility is strength. Humility is strength of character, and so we must see this as a character virtue. And I wish more of us could take on tons and tons of load of humility, because it's so important. And and not just couple alone, because we're talking to marriage and counsel, and by extension to the whole family. When I teach family life, I talk about that same humility, because if you are wrong, you have to have the humility to come and say that I am wrong, I was sorry, please forgive me. Not only to your spouse, which might be wrong, to your children and all. And don't think because, okay, I am the adult, I am the superior one in authority here, so I don't need to say sorry to my children. I've had to say sorry to my children many times. Something come across and conflict, you promise them, okay, we're going to go to the park, I'm going on the road, daddy going out and come back in an hour time, like we said, like the Lord Mascot. And then, whatever you reach up with and ruin the whole day, and you come back and the plan is all skewed. You have to humble yourself, you know, and
But you have
people
to.
appreciate you. People appreciate you more because they see that you're acting as a human being should act with compassion and consideration, you know. People appreciate you more as a normal human being when you can show humility. And in this situation here between spouses, particularly in conflicting situations, humility is so very important. If we are wrong, if we don't have the strength, if we have not been a boundary-loving spouse, then we should begin to develop and grow in that area of humility where we can give deference to the spouse, to the other person, and to allow them to say no, and to allow myself to acknowledge the fact that, you know, I was manipulating, I was trying to control this situation, but, you know, I am sorry, I was wrong, you know. It doesn't take a whole year to do that, I mean, or to say that, you know, and some relationships could be for the better and could even be saved if somebody could just come to that point where they can just be humble enough to say, well, you know, I have been too controlling, too manipulative. I think that this is the wrong thing. I want to change that attitude or that behavior. How could you help me? I'll help myself, but how could you help me as well? You know, that is the growth experience. That because remember, we said husband and wife, they're a team. It's a growth experience where you help me grow, I help you grow, and both of us are growing.
Certainly, certainly. Friends, if you're just joining us, you are listening to Marriage Encounter. We are discussing conflict resolution for couples who do not love boundaries. And we are making the point that change is sometimes very difficult, very challenging sometimes, and in fact, we are pointing out some things that you may want to do to effect change. We are doing this from the perspective that we recognize that these are not easy things, especially when you're not accustomed to loving boundaries. So we recognize that these are not easy things, but we're saying that if you want a successful relationship and if you really want to do better at moving towards what is going to benefit your relationship, you want to begin to do some of these things. So we spoke about allowing your spouse the privilege to say no. And I want to add, Pastor, you just spoke, in fact, you were speaking to this already, the matter of humility, admitting that you have been trying to control your spouse. Now, that's a big deal for some people. I can hear some folks saying, me, I will never do that. Admit that I've been trying to control my spouse. You would never hear the end of that. You know, I can hear some folks saying, well, you know, when I think about it, I have really been controlling. And to be honest with you, sometimes in counseling relationships, you can see that, you know, sometimes it's a woman who wants to control the husband, and sometimes it's the husband who wants to control the wife. It goes both ways. And sometimes you can see that they're at the point where they are aware, they're acknowledging, yes, I have been controlling, but to be able to look the spouse in the eye and say, listen, I'm sorry, I have been trying to control you. I'm going to try to do better. Help me here. That is going to require a lot of humility, most certainly.
And maturity, right?
Yes,
and as we would always say when we were growing up, that open confession, as we say, open confession is good for the soul. To openly confess that, yes, I've been manipulated, I'm trying to control, and henceforth, I want to change that behavior, and I will change for the better, and hence the relationship will change for the better when I can come to that position, you know.
That is so true, Pastor. You know, I mean, imagine what your relationship will be when you have always assumed a posture of inflexibility, when you have always assumed a posture that you can't make mistakes, when you have always assumed a posture that you are right and your spouse is wrong, when you begin to say, Sweetheart, I'm sorry. I admit I've been trying to control you. You know, your wife may get a heart attack, so be careful how you start it. But but imagine what a breath of fresh air that will bring to your relationship, Pastor.
Well, again, if you work with the assumption that, okay, I don't need to humble myself and say I'm trying to control you because my point of view, my thinking on this issue is always correct. More than one thing can happen there. The person can shut down the other person, that relationship with you, begin to distance them, allow you to be self-opinionated and make your decision and deal with the consequences. And they will say, okay, since it's your decision, I had no input in this, you deal with it yourself and deal with the consequences yourself. People can take that option. They can get quiet. Okay, since you, my opinion or point of view is not valued, needless, I hope my discussion at all with you on this issue because, I know what the response is going to be. So we are creating some distance in the relationship. When that begins to happen, right? We no longer operating as a team when this begins to happen because it is your opinion, it is your decision. You the one who running things, as we say. They say, no, I run things in this relationship, in this house. And the person may step back and allow you to run things. Regardless of the consequences, they may shut down, get quiet on you. Okay, whatever you say goes and become sarcastic. Whatever you say goes, know it all, and do it all. So these, you don't want that kind of situation to develop, because remember, marriage is a team. It's we are together, and it is a mutual experience.
It certainly is. And you don't want a situation where you're pushing against each other. It's not a tug of war game. Some of you would remember your experiences in childhood of tug of war. And you're trying to pull your spouse across the line and your spouse is pulling back. And one time you give, one time your spouse gives. That is not what the relationship is. You're not pulling against each other. You're not fighting against each other. You are seeking to walk the same road, but respecting boundaries, respecting the fact that God made us as separate individuals, and we are coming together to form a union. So it's always a good idea to submit to God's process. The matter of learning boundaries is really akin to learning self-control. It's akin to getting to the point where I must have emotional intelligence. I must know what makes me tick. I must be able to understand what are the things that will stimulate a bad reaction, etc. And not so much for my spouse, but so that I can control my reaction. Because I must seek to be the best me. I must seek to be a good person. I must seek to be an individual that my spouse enjoys. I want to be the kind of spouse that my wife would be happy to be around. And if I'm always bossing my wife, always telling her what to do, always saying, no, your opinion can't work here, so, then pretty soon my wife does not want to be around me. And what we're suggesting is that you want to change that. The whole concept here of submitting to God's process of molding you into what he wants you to be. In the book of Jeremiah, I think chapter 18, when God gave Jeremiah a beautiful object lesson of where Israel was. Israel was in a state of brokenness, and God sent Jeremiah down to the potter's field, the potter's shop, and he was able to observe that the potter was working on some clay, and the Bible says that the clay was mad in the hands of the potter, but the fact that it was in the hand of the potter, and the potter is Jesus, he was able to remake the clay into something useful. And that's what we want to do. We want God to use us. When we see our brokenness, when we see our inefficiencies, we must submit and ask God to help us to develop the ability to respect and love boundaries.
Yes, and I think on the last broadcast, not the last broadcast, the one before, I was making that point, not to sound theological, but I can't help but saying that because remember, it was ordained by God, and therefore we have to go back there sometime to see what was his ideal, and we have to appreciate the fact that we have gone so far from what he had established as ideal, there, and so submitting to to God's process, because that is what it ought to be, because that is what he intended when he put the couple together, right? It was a complementary relationship. It was not an inferior versus superior relationship. It was one that was complementary, and so we have to appreciate the fact how much we have been affected by our own personal brokenness, the fall and sin, and how these things have affected our behavior, self. I think I mentioned that the broadcast before the last one, becomes the major issue. And a lot of times, I think somebody puts it beautifully. The problem with the human is the problem of the human heart. I think it's Strutman who puts it that way. The problem of the human, and some family life material, I think I was reading from him, and he was talking to the same issue, how self comes in the way that we want to control and manipulate. It's basic self. And we're going back to the whole conflict situation. The man who started the conflict, it was self, right? I wanted to exalt myself and to be above, like God, when he was a created creature. So yes, so God, we are actually submitting to God's doings, and that is what we are. All of us must submit to Him, and then it is easier for us to submit to each other and to relate to each other as he intended, right? It is a mutual experience. And if you read in Ephesians, that is what it says. What we lost at creation, we get back in redemption, right? So ought men to love their wives of their own self, and husbands ought to love their wives as well. And women ought to respect their husband. And then we see in the same passage, the verse talks about a mutual, so that both ought to submit and respect each other. So we're seeing that that what God intended, right? And I don't want to miss that. What God intended is not a controlling situation. It's a mutual experience where both persons are building each other up, where both persons are growing, because that is what God intended from the beginning.
I think one needs to always bear in mind, I'm aware that not every marriage will result in children, but for those homes that have children, remember one of the things that is happening is that you are molding your children for a future generation. You're preparing them to become parents. You're preparing them to become husbands and wives. And you are saying to them by your lifestyle, this is how a husband ought to be, or this is how a wife ought to be. Now, what happens when you as a wife, I'm deliberately choosing to use the woman in this sense because the men say we're always on the woman's side. So what happens when a wife decides, or maybe not decide, but unconsciously or otherwise, is very controlling when she wants to dictate how the husband must do this, how the husband must do that, how the husband must dress, when he must leave home, when he must do so. And he begins to rebel, and he begins to say things to the children. You see that woman there? So. Now, the children are picking up things. And it will not take long for them to realize that there is not a proper connection between mommy and daddy. And that is interfering with their maturity, with the objectivity with which they are to view husbands and wives. And it affects them. And some people, unfortunately, grow up thinking, I don't ever want to have a relationship because I don't, I've seen the suffering that my father had or the suffering that my wife had. And what more, if the man gets to the point where he decides that this is going to become an excuse for him to have an extramarital affair, to get somebody who is not controlling, that really brings a lot of chaos in the relationship. What we are saying is that you must not take your responsibilities for granted. You are to model correctly to your children. And even if you don't have children in this relationship, God's ideal is that you ought to respect one another. You ought to love boundaries. You ought to have the decency to respect the fact that the individual you married is not a child, but an adult. You know, I am aware that in some places around the world, there are child marriages, but we know that those things are inappropriate. And so we're talking culturally here now that when two people get married, in many of the countries that where you're from, who are listening, the legal age for a person to get married is 18, and in some places 21. And so you get married as adults, not as children. And therefore, if two adults are in a relationship, they must be willing to respect one another, to recognize that each one of them has a mind, has a brain, to think, to process things, and not just to give the decision-making process over to somebody else.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a different presentation by itself, and maybe you can think about having some professionals come together on your Let's Talk program to talk to that one, because you made a very significant point, and that's loaded from a social context. How the system affects the outcomes in terms of children and their behavior and what choices they make in terms of marriage and relationship. That's a major thing, because when we look at it from the system's perspective, right, we say if the head is sick, then the whole system is sick. And sometimes people leave that system seriously wounded and perpetuate that brokenness and can't form relationships and cannot mature as they ought to. That's quite a lot of stuff. That's a whole program by itself to talk to, right? But we are saying that there are ways or there are areas in which the spouse who does not love boundary must grow. And that is what we're talking to. And now you did start to talk to that, I think the last program or the one before. How do we respect the freedom of our spouse? Can we continue not respecting the freedom of our spouse, even though we understand that this is an alliance and this person is a mature being, as an individual person that I'm not supposed to control? Because the last broadcast, we were saying that you have to be able to come to the point of humility where you're admitting that you have been controlling or you attempted to manipulate your spouse. Coming to that realization, we are saying now that you must be able to respect the freedom of your spouse after you've come to the realization that, okay, I've been trying to be manipulative, I've been trying to control. Now I have to come to the point where I'm respecting the freedom of my spouse, right? You know, and that this is something that people are still struggling with, respecting the freedom.
I do agree. I quite agree that a lot of people struggle with that. But I want to say, Pastor, that if we begin to demonstrate that respect, pretty soon we're going to discover that our spouses come to us and ask us for our opinion, you know? What's your view on this? Do you think I should do so, or do you think I should do so? Because there is freedom, because the atmosphere is light, and because there is trust. And that is what happens when we build that kind of respect, that then our spouse sees us as individuals, and they know now they can get an honest opinion. And that if you say something, when I'm in a relationship with somebody and the individual can speak freely, knowing that I am going to be genuine, I'm going to be objective, I'm going to be honest, that makes that individual better. They're able to take my advice because then I'm not just saying it because I want them to feel good. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, it happens over time, and you're so correct, right? You will find over time when you allow for the freedom, the person will come to ask your opinion. In my case, I think sometimes, I said, well, why do you want to ask me? I trust you. You've been doing this. I mean, I trust that's your domain, man. Make the decision and go ahead with it. I mean, over time, you trust the person because you have seen over time what decision they would make, so you don't have to worry again, right? That you have given them that freedom. But my wife will still come to ask me, man, to go ahead and do that, man. I think you you have that covered. You don't have to worry. I don't have to worry. I think that's okay. So over time, yeah, the person still know that, okay, I am given this freedom. There's trust, there's confidence in me. The person feels good about themselves. That of course I have this freedom, and I'm an individual. I can make decision. My wife or my husband trust my judgment on this particular thing, right? And so sometimes I think that I am bombarded by all these questions, and just go ahead and do, because I trust you on this. So yeah, it is so important. It's just a beautiful thing when the other
But
person
Pastor,
knows.
again, our time is up, so we're gonna have to wrap
Time
it
is
up.
up. Wow.
But we do want to thank you, viewers, listeners, for joining us. We will be back next week with a continuation of this very significant discussion. We have said some hard things, but we trust that you understand that change is always painful, but it's for the better. So that's all the time we have. We're going to be back next week. If you have questions, comments, or concerns, please drop us a line, marriageencounter@slcadventist.org. That is marriageencounter@slcadventist.org. Until next week, same time, may God's richest blessings be yours.